And welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilborn, Michael Hamlet, and Andy Murray here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, the Wednesday Night War between AEW and NXT, pay-per-views, interviews. We have more roundtable discussions like this one and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But gents, we are gathered here today to discuss AEW Dynamite, and more specifically, what are AEW doing right and wrong with their weekly TV show? Now, I don't want to make this too basic, but Michael Hamlet, you're kind of here as the wrong side of AEW Dynamite.
Because he's wrong about AEW
And Andy Murray, you're here as the right side. Because I think it's fair to say you are... you're more WWE slanted, I suppose, and you're a big fan, of course, of the new AEW Dynamite.
AEW Dynamite is far and away my favourite wrestling show on television, even though it's only had 4 episodes. However, I am not blind at all to the show's flaws. So this should be fun.
So let's dive straight into it. Andy, why don't you start us off with the first thing that AEW are doing right with Dynamite?
AEW Dynamite are sticking to Tony Khan's promises of what the show would be and how it would be presented. They are building a level of goodwill amongst their fans who, week by week, know that they're going to come in and they're going to get exactly what they want from the show, regardless of how matches go and how things are booked and so forth. They know that when they sit down to Dynamite, they're not going to get some silly nonsense that they didn't invest their time in, they didn't buy the ticket for. So Tony Khan gave an interview on the Wade Keller podcast of Pro Wrestling Torch just before Dynamite's debut. I think it was the day before. And on this, he went some way to kind of like assuaging fears that maybe, you know, you can't maintain a real sport focus, or you can't not have goofy comedy. You need variety. You need all that stuff that's on Being the Elite that had a lot of people concerned. You need the Librarians, which had gone over so poorly on pay-per-view, and all this stuff would creep in. In this interview, he promised great matches. This is subjective, but if you're an AEW fan, of course, I think that the matches are probably scratching your itch at the moment. High production values, got that. Less goofy stuff, less of the Being the Elite comedy that maybe wouldn't go over on live TV. We've seen almost none of that. We've seen the Librarians relegated to dark in 2-minute squashes with Kip Sabian and Sammy Kiss? Sonny Kiss. Sammy Kiss is a really good name. The backstage dramatic invisible camera segments, gone. I mean, on the first show we had them checking in with the 2 teams ahead of the main event. But that's no different to what we get from a UFC fight. To me, that doesn't really fall under the category of what he's talking about. Fewer DQs. We haven't seen any, I don't think, unless I'm missing one off the top of my head. Less ridiculous referee bumps. We have seen some instances of the referees looking a bit stupid in other examples, but that's going to be, spoiler alert, one of my wrongs. And fewer distraction roll-ups. And you know, we can sit here and talk about real sport feel and all this stuff, but they've done a really good job of sticking to that edict. You know, it's only 4 shows deep, so it's hard to give them too much credit for that. But so far, they've told you what the show is going to be, and they've stuck to it. And really, that almost sounds like faint praise, but it's something other wrestling companies haven't necessarily done. Even promotions like New Japan in 2019 have fallen into traps of constant rematches that don't make a whole lot of sense, and, you know, overexposing certain pairings and going back on what people really want from the product. I think bringing in lots of Western tropes and match finishes. Here at AEW are distinguishing themselves, and I think they deserve a little pat on the back for that.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, I was, you know, one of the first queuing up with knives out to try and take a shot at AEW, as much as WWE has sort of ruined my loyalty with them over the recent weeks and months. But I haven't really got that many complaints with what you've just put there, and what that they've been putting out themselves. I've enjoyed, like you say, the feel of every single show. It's felt like whenever they had an option where WWE would arguably take the wrong option, AEW have selected what most fans would want them to do. And like you say, they've quickly gauged the audience. And it's all well and good standing there and promising that, well, everything that you think is crap with WWE or any other wrestling promotion on television, we're going to do the opposite to that. But it's a whole other kettle of fish to deliver that. And also, I know it's only 4 weeks and what have you, and it take a concerted effort, like old iterations of Impact, to really mess that up. But there are chances for AEW to shoot themselves in the foot that they've avoided. Like you say, there's a chance that they hotshot stuff, that they do stuff that doesn't really make sense but will pop a rating. But it's been consistent, it's been enjoyable, and like you say, it's ticked all of the right boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there will be times when they will have to do sports entertainment style tropes, and that's not necessarily going to be a bad thing when they do, because sports entertainment at its best is bloody awesome.
They've already done it too.
Oh, they have.
They've already done it.
They've done several bits and pieces, but I don't think they've done anything so far to betray their audience's trust. And when every other promotion in the world, major promotion, is doing that on such a regular basis, I think that's a pretty big win.
Right. The thing is, it's quite exhausting hearing and absorbing the effusive praise towards AEW if you're not so high on the product yourself. And I'm not sure long term how well that's going to go for them. And I use the example of the conversation you two have literally just had as we're sat here. It's a bit of a heads I win, tails you lose situation when you're trying to argue with an AEW fan, because you both have just said, and this is not to be confrontational, that, they've only been on the air 4 weeks, so we maybe can't give them too much praise. But so far, they've not let their audience down. So you've used one thing to defend yourself and then one thing to argue against it in the very same sentence. And that comes up quite a lot because it is a new product and because, yes, they've not yet failed. I could be sat here as the old man yelling at a cloud saying, yeah, but they're going to fail eventually, because odds are most companies will fail in some way eventually. They will let the fans down, or they will do things wrong, or things like that. So I think one of the difficult things with AEW at the moment is, as much as people are trying really hard to assess the show objectively, I think subjectivity takes too grand a position, because a lot of people were so thirsty for this product to be as good as it was. I will say this in defence of AEW, because I'm going to try and approach this the same way as Murray and try and be as balanced as I can. What AEW, I think, is doing very successfully at the moment, in spite of some of the criticisms that I'm about to follow on with, so it might sound like I'm down with faint praise, is it's been the first show in a long time to remind you that a 2-hour wrestling show can be watched as a 2-hour wrestling show. I personally think NXT is doing that as well, but I know plenty of people disagree. But what we've seen on Wednesdays is the return of a 2-hour wrestling show, around 90 minutes of content with adverts included, that is watchable as a single thing, not Raw on double speed as we all watch, not SmackDown on at least 1.5 speed as we all watch.
Triple speed most weeks.
Not pay-per-views that you never watch again when you've watched them once, because they're all 4 hours long as a shot. Not WrestleMania that most people would argue should be split into 2 days. They have found a way to make a wrestling show, and again, everything I'm saying here I would apply to NXT, diverse and interesting enough and full of enough things going on that it feels no different than if you were tuning into your favourite television show. And that is a credit to the Wednesday night wrestling of the moment. Where I differ slightly from, I don't differ slightly from Andy Murray's point, but Tony Khan keeping his promise about the formula of AEW Dynamite has made me like Dynamite less. I personally found last week's episode, which was the edition with 3 tag team matches, the big Cody Rhodes, Chris Jericho angle in the middle, the worst episode of Dynamite so far.
Really?
I enjoyed it the least of all the episodes.
My favourite show of the year.
Yeah, and this is very me and you in the mornings at work, our daily disagreement. I found it the least engaging episode because I didn't appreciate the agenting of it at all. I think WWE would be crucified for allowing 2 or 3 things identical to one another happening, like back to back to back to back, and yet that's what I felt like I was watching. I felt like one tag team match diluted the other one. I felt like we were weeks in to these tag team tournament matches, which have been enjoyable if you box them off as cocaine fireworks displays, but somewhat draining to me, looking for, let's use the NXT criticism, a bit more clinical, a bit more pro wrestling. I took the SmackDown main event, the big 6-man pro wrestling match, as more enjoyable than yet another private party spot fest that felt a little bit tired. I would argue that there's not been enough use of different roster members to the point where I feel like I'm tiring of the formula of a big Young Bucks match, for example, and I shouldn't be. We're 4 weeks deep. I don't think there's been enough use of a roster yet I know Cody said his maths are out with 40%, but there's not been enough use of this quite diverse roster that they've assembled to the point where 4 weeks deep, I don't believe I should be getting bored by certain acts. Now, again, we are speaking in subjective terms because I do believe AEW is servicing his fan base quite well, but this sort of leads me on to something that I'll talk about later on, about just how successful could it be argued that they've been with retaining and gaining and engaging followers that maybe weren't there beforehand or weren't already very prepped and very thirsty for Dynamite's existence?
I think a variety, yes, we've seen, various iterations of tag team matches and so many combinations that are already laid out in front of us, and they've, blown their load on some already, including Pac Moxley, etc., etc., etc. But how do you respond to something like that?
Well, I too have a lack of general variety in match structure down as one of my main wrongs. I think that they've locked into a gear at the moment so far, four shows in, where there almost is a belief that everything has to be 10 to 15 minutes and chasing 3.5, 4 stars. I don't think that's the case. I think they should adopt more squash matches. I think they should adopt shorter matches, have a few more sprints here and there, and mix things up a little bit, because it can be quite tiring getting through, even for these shows. I love these shows. Like I say, last week was literally my favorite episode of wrestling TV all year. They do need to switch things up a bit. They do need to have MJF come out and beat local goober number 5 in a minute. Do that every other week. Have Nyla Rose kill Leva Bates. She did it on Dark, but it was too long. They got it wrong. Bates got too much offense in. It just didn't work. Have some squashes. Switch things up. Flip the format a little bit. I want to see people like Sonny Kiss on TV as well. But I would say that early on, they've had so much stuff to cram in, particularly with the tag team tournament. They haven't had a massive window to execute that. And that is a fault of their creation. But that's necessitated people like the Young Bucks and Private Party being on TV almost every week. They've kind of had to do that. Maybe now I think the tournament finishes this week.
They're not paying it off at the pay-per-view, are they? They're going to pay it off on television.
They've got the Rock and Roll Express showing up to hand over the belts, which is the most Cody thing of all time. But no, absolutely, I really do think they could use more variety in the styles of matches. However, to argue Michael's point about there being too many similar types of tag teams, I think that your enjoyment, I think that the main driving factor behind fans and enjoyment of things and how invested you are is how much you're into the characters and how much stock you've put into these people and stuff as performers, how much you buy into the storylines. I don't think this gets talked about enough. When people break down matches, we talk about moves, cohesion, stories, psychology, all these other things, but the fact is, if I'm more invested in Scorpio Sky than Michael is, I'm probably going to be more into.
He's
Scorpio
like my favorite AEW guy as it goes.
Okay, so
I feel like he's working around
Trent
some of that.
Beretta in that case, right? Yeah. If I'm more into Best Friends, I probably got a lot more out of Best Friends versus the Young Bucks than Michael, and I certainly did. I think that with the SCU match on this week's episode, after the angle with the Lucha Brothers ambushing them, I was so desperate for these guys to overcome, who on earth did they face again? Dark Order, so they could get their hands on those dastardly Lucha Brothers after the opening match, that I was utterly glued to this thing and perhaps blind to a few of its flaws. But that's what pro wrestling is, isn't it, at the end of it? Yeah,
what do you make of AEW's storytelling generally so far?
So far, so good. I think it's had the emotional hooks that I want beyond, and I hate to sit here and do the NXT WWE comparisons, but a lot of NXT storytelling is guy shows up on ramp, there's a little face-off. It kind of, it's carried by the electricity in the building and the investment, like I've just described, that people have in these characters. Tommaso Ciampa comes back. If you love Tommaso Ciampa and you've been away and you've missed him and you've been invested in his struggle, you're going to love that moment where he comes back and he stares down. Obviously, it escalated last week with the Finn Balor thing. But no, I think AEW in general has done a tremendous job. And the storytelling leads into my next, right?
Well, before we get onto that, one negative I wanted to mention in and around that storytelling, and it applies to NXT as well. Despite Jericho's brilliant work, real lack of promo time in All Elite Wrestling.
Yeah, and I know you're looking for a table flipping moment between me and Murray. This is probably as close as it's going to get in terms of how cross I feel. I think the character development on AEW, beyond select guys, who I will get to, has been piss weak. Who have we had video packages on since AEW has come into existence? Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks. Inexcusable. An inexcusable amount of video.
For the Dark Order last week, eh?
and what I want to get wrong in the Dark Order. Yes, I'm aware that Being the Elite exists. Yes, I'm aware that Road 2 exists. But those can't be crutches for Dynamite. Dynamite is
I'm a casual fan. I'm not watching those.
Exactly. And Dynamite is there as much. Yes, I understand at the moment it's very much in service of a core audience. A core audience that, by the way, is diminished by 500,000 fans since week 1. Yes, it's only 4 weeks. That will always be the defense. It's only 4 weeks. But just because those have gone, it doesn't mean they had to go. It doesn't mean after week 1 or week 2 there wasn't something happening that was telling you about 6 different guys. There are 2 hours of television time that we don't need another 3-minute segment on just how great Cody Rhodes is and isn't he everybody's best friend, shiny tooth. We don't need to be told that the Young Bucks changed tag team wrestling because they can show us that in their matches. Well, they used to be able to, but they can show us that in their matches rather than needing to tell us through video packages. I'm all for them revisiting certain WCW tropes that WWE never bothered with. They've got the literal guy there himself, Tony Schiavone, that should be there after a match with a microphone in his hand, asking the man that's just won, what's coming next, what's happening, who are you keen to fight, blah, 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 blah. Those little developments would be fine in the place of vignettes. We've not even really had those. When have they turned up? Brandy Rhodes. You know, it's hard not to be cynical that the people getting these little profiled moments are the people that need them the least. And I just feel like when the matches can't necessarily speak for themselves, it's one thing to put Private Party to be watching ringside in the crowd. It's quite another to run a video package as good as the one that was on Road 2 about 3 months ago that we saw that perhaps 100,000 people didn't.
Having said that, we have to give credit because they have had one of the best promos of the year, in my opinion, from someone who you would expect it from, to be fair. But Chris Jericho did some phenomenal work when he introduced the Inner Circle.
Before Murray showers this in praise, I feel like a best moment of the Wednesday Night War so far.
Yeah.
Like, for all I preferred NXT's output, Jericho stole the whole thing so far. Yeah. That was money.
Yeah, for me, like the lack of promo time is a massive problem. I don't understand why they haven't just given MJF 5 minutes and a live mic to just rip. And they gave him that promo on the first show, but it was like Diet MJF. It was like 30 seconds long. It wasn't on point. This week, we're finally getting Jon Moxley on the microphone. They've confirmed this. Good. Jon Moxley's one of the best talkers, one of the most underrated talkers in the whole game.
Seeing him, when I saw him in New Japan, it opened my eyes.
Shooter!
Yeah. Just to, you often forget that with guys in WWE because they're so constrained.
Scripted and stuff. Yeah, no, it's been weak. The lack of promo time so far has been weak. The Jericho promo was absolutely phenomenal. Loved it. I thought the Cody, this will lead into my next point, which will be a right if we can do that. But the Cody Jericho, I got so much out of that angle this week and so forth. But yes, the lack of promo time is a concern. I do think that they addressed it a little bit on the most recent show, as wrestling heavy as it was. We got the big Cody Jericho angle. It's the world title feud. They're always going to get something. You got the Britt Baker video package. You got a little something on the Dark Order as well. Someone had an inset promo. I can't remember who, but they are at least trying to tweak it and, alter the show as they go. But for me, if we can go to the Cody Jericho angle a bit. Now, this was a great example of AEW using the good side of sports entertainment to great effect, because this thing was hotter than the surface of the sun. I think, for me, to contrast Michael, I think the most impactful thing of the Wednesday Night War so far, and probably my favorite thing so far, was the Finn Balor turn, which I thought was just... I don't have a single criticism for that. I thought it was phenomenal. However, on the same night, AEW came away with this angle that was just an absolute hoot. What they are getting really good at is these big layered angles that take one pop, pile another one on top, and another one, and another one, and the end pop is always the strongest. So this week, we got Cody getting interrupted with the horns, and all his guys coming out, Chris Jericho, with just some brilliant lines. Who wears a scarf? You entitled millennial little bitch, yeah. Like, it's horrendous. It's endlessly entertaining stuff. The brawl, the fist through the window. The angle that stands out the most for me.
The T-shirt that they're selling with "I got a ticket" on it with his face on.
It's just it's great capitalism. that's what it is. But the big angle, the brawl after not the Inner Circles formation, the one the next week, to me is the most spectacular example of just AEW using an angle to service so many things at once. So you had the Cody Jericho program, obviously. You had Jericho's upcoming match at the time with Darby Allin. You had the Young Bucks versus Ortiz and Santana. That's obviously booked now. You had Jake Hager brawl into the back with Hangman Page. That's a potential program because you have that thing sitting there. You have Hager versus Dustin Rhodes potentially someday. They haven't really capitalized on it yet, but obviously he battered Big Dust from behind with a brutal elbow. You have MJF versus Sammy Guevara would be a nice little rookies feud, or don't call them rookies. You also, coming out of this, had content that serves a potential Hangman Page heel turn, because on Being the Elite, they've been getting at him for not having their back. And you also had a great tease of the MJF heel turn when he had the chair and he had the chance to kill Cody. And the thing is, with that MJF heel turn, right, it is so predictable. Everyone knows it's going to happen. But it's been built up so well and the characters are so over. And sometimes in wrestling, the best thing is the most predictable thing. And when that finally happens, because people are so hot on Cody, no matter what you think of him as a performer, and I'm sure we'll get the Jeff Jarrett comparison soon enough, it's over as hell and it's working for the people in that building. The angles to me are just the most spectacularly choreographed angles in wrestling at the moment.
I really enjoy what Cody's doing right now. I want to get your thoughts on the angles in just a second. But, I should point out, because I feel like NXT gets a little bit overlooked because of all the hype around AEW. And there was a lot of, not criticism, but question marks around Undisputed Era and the way that's being handled, despite the fact that you've had such amazing reactions to Finn Balor and Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano and the excitement around all those potential feuds going forward. I thought the NXT North American Championship stuff was genius, to be perfectly honest, as much as people criticise, saying, why has he done that? I realise we're talking about NXT here, but why has he done that when he could just have let either one of those two behemoths win and then just face them instead? I thought it was actually two pieces of very smart work from them, from Roderick Strong, because A, half the time authority figures in WWE are completely impotent, and B, if I was going to have to fight either Keith Lee or Dominik Dijakovic or both, but there's a potential that they're going to be fighting each other, what are you going to do in that situation? But anyway, your thoughts on the angles of AEW in particular? You
bang right with Finn Balor, by the way. That was far more than just a flash turn. That was weeks of storytelling earned to have all those guys lined up at the exact moment they were lined up. That doesn't happen through the click of a finger and a magic wand heel turn.
Informed by 4 years of history as well.
Yeah, lots and lots going on there. MJF is a good starting point to get back to angles here, because we are all extremely excited. I would assume most people watching and listening to this will be very excited for MJF's turn. But when he came out in that segment, which I will get to because I hated it, the pop was...
I loved it.
The pop was enormous.
Yeah.
The pop was absolutely enormous. It wasn't booze because here comes this dickhead that we've all been trained to hate. We've all been trained to hate MJF. Short of one segment where he slagged off like that crowd on night one, He's not. He's literally the salt of the earth. He's twice come out, defended Cody, and helped him in a really hard fight. He's actually just a babyface at the moment. Being the elite and months of teasing has told us that this MJF's a scumbag. And when the turn comes, as Murray points out, the best wrestling is predictable. The best wrestling is if you want to see, you just don't know when you're going to see it. But my worry is they pull this trigger quite soon, long before anybody is actually, a casual fan has realised that this guy's a baddie. I tweeted about how great it was when he mocked DDP's little bang thing to the camera. It wasn't even dwelled upon by the commentators. He walks down the ring and he goes... like that about DDP. And I tweeted saying how great this was. And I had a couple of friends of mine that have found AEW through it being on quite easy to access in the UK. And they've said, is this not going to be a double turn? When he turns, is this not going to be like Steve Austin and The Rock and more people are going to cheer MJF than Cody? That was genuinely how they'd received these two characters. And I thought, wow, yeah, they haven't watched 6 months of Being the Elite to know that this guy's absolute slime. And it did make me think, yeah, they've neglected him. They've neglected giving him 5 minutes a week, because that would all it would take, 5 minutes a week. And you'd know exactly who this guy was.
5 minutes 1 week would have been enough.
On was it the indie show where the AEW guys came over to the UK, where Anthony Ogogo announced that he'd signed with them, he knocked MJF clean out because MJF's a dick, and then Cody carried him out on his back. That's their friendship. That's the storyline, and that's not what has been told. What we've been told is that MJF's actually pretty hard, and he's got Cody's back. They've neglected to cover that little bit of the storyline that's actually very important. Why I hated the Cody Rhodes storyline, okay? I feel like I'm being prodded every time Cody speaks because I loathe him. I think he's basically a guy playing in his own sandpit in a way that Triple H used to and that Jeff Jarrett did too. I will say that if you watch on silent, that's how that argument comes to life, because in those arenas, he gets the loudest pops tonight. He begs for them on his entrance, but he gets them nonetheless, right? He gets his own special entrance that nobody else gets, but he gets them nonetheless. He gets to bring his own dog out and put him into a fire nearly, but he gets the reactions nonetheless. Cody's just great. But the thing with Cody is that he does this thing that he just can't resist. He prods the opposition.
Well, this I was going to get you to talk about. I want to talk about your thoughts on the little negs.
We're not like those other guys, followed by something that those other guys do, which is bring out his friends with music cues.
What they should say is, we are not your kind.
Yeah. We're not like those other guys. his big list of friends ends in a nostalgia pop for DDP. We're not like those other guys. Oh, there's a bit of nepotism because there's Dustin Rhodes. They're a lot like those other guys, right? And this is absolutely fine because wrestling can't change wrestling. AEW were never going to change the universe by putting on a pro wrestling show. They were going to change the universe by doing things different. And ultimately, Dynamite isn't all that different, in my opinion, to something like NXT. It's very different to Monday Night Raw at the moment. I would like Raw to be a bit more like Dynamite, quite honestly. But it's not that different from all the pro wrestling I've seen in 30 years of a wasted life watching this thing, you know? And I just think if they dialed way back on that, and I mean all the way back, non-existent back, then what you would get would be WWE, because WWE are always going to be the heels in this argument for at least 10 years, right? AEW have got to put a lot of feet wrong to do something worse than this Saudi Arabia deal, okay?
For sure.
So from a narrative and a discourse point of view, they're always going to be the baby faces. So the last thing they need to do is cash out some of those chips by Cody getting a bit overexcited with these inelegant digs. I seem to recall the last time he had a dig at WWE, it wasn't the throne. It was saying, we're not like those other guys, we're going to give you a suitable replacement. Terrible dig. WWE give great replacements. He's not actually very good at having a stab. The days of Kenny and the Young Bucks on Being the Elite being pretty funny about how they took shots at the opposition are long gone because the old sports entertainer's come in with a hard-on for his dad's old product and does the worst job of it. I wish that he would leave that alone. There are a lot of reasons to dislike Cody Rhodes, in my opinion. And I do wonder if, because he's so beloved within AEW, he's kind of an extension of this thing that they're not necessarily appealing to casuals. I would love to get the pulse and the temperature of views towards Cody as a top babyface from people that are very new to this product, because I don't think it's as cut and dried as those live crowds would make it appear.
Right, finally, one each. One more right, one more wrong.
One of each.
One of each?
One of each. Wrong. Not keeping control of Jim Ross. The man, he's a wrestling announcer. The man is paid money very handsomely, if what we've been led to believe is true. His job is to cover flaws, not draw attention to them. Yet he sits there every other... No, to be fair, he's been very good on occasion in AEW, right? On TV, he has had matches where he has been absolutely tremendous. But every now and then when there's like a match that isn't his wrestling, he goes, what's this guy doing? Why is he not over there? Why is the referee not enforcing the rule? That's not his job. His job is to gloss over those. His job is to take your attention away from these things that are happening. Now, if you want to have these complaints, and Jim Ross does have several valid points, tag rules need tightening up, legal man, all kinds of stuff.
I think he's trying to tease out logic from Excalibur. I think that's what he's trying to do, but I think he's getting it wrong.
But he's getting it entirely wrong. He wasn't sitting there doing this in the Attitude Era. When stupid stuff was happening on TV, was Jim Ross going, oh, why is he embalming? Why is Steve Austin getting embalmed on a wrestling TV show? This is ridiculous. This isn't Mid-South or whatever. It's just something that has crept into his work over the past 20 years. If these complaints exist, and some of them are valid, he should take it up behind the scenes. I think it's about time old Tony Khan, the sugar man, took Jim backstage, put an arm around his shoulder, sprinkled some of that sweet icing on his chest and said, Jimmy, baby, you got to reel it in. Because he does have to reel it in. As far as another right goes, I think the way they've presented their, in stark contrast to their women's division, which isn't very good, NXT's is brilliant. AEW have done a tremendous job building, developing, establishing the tag division so far. If you're not into the style of matches like Michael isn't, this appeal will only go so far for you. But I think they've established a tiered system of established acts like the Young Bucks, up-and-comers like the Private Party, acts that haven't worked like the Dark Order, who are now being cycled down as they should be. And to me, there's no real weak links apart from the Dark Order's gimmick.
Very quickly, one final thing I wanted to ask you about was Winloss Records. Big thing that was made prior to AEW and has worked and has been appreciated to a certain extent. However, the muddying of the waters with the quality of wins, etc., has been a slight issue. I'm
going to start with a wrong that comes back around to being a right in the end, so we all end as friends with this.
Best friends.
Yeah. The win-loss thing, I think, would be absolutely fine if they were transparent with it. I am willing to buy in to the quality of win argument. When they announced, I think it was Darby Allin and Jimmy Havoc, the problem that created was that it was the cart before the horse. If you had said beforehand that these are the reasons why that these two were going to fight for the title, and by the way, these two are going to fight for the title, you've already disarmed some people that might fire in straight away and say, well, what are these two doing fighting for the title? They've not been anywhere near transparent enough with something that they were very keen to get across as being a big part of their framework. They were saying that, wins and losses matter is a platitude because WWE, through Road Dogg on Twitter, once said wins and losses don't matter. So that was all that was. That was Tony Khan and Cody Rhodes grandstanding that, like, we're going to do this is opposite land to WWE. It was just one of their many promises that was made from that foundation. But what they have attempted to create with those little 0-2 scorecards on the wrestlers' names is the idea that this is real. I will say in defense of Dynamite that it feels more like a sports show in that the time limit draws are a way that we are out of time on this sports show. The referee has just blown the full-time whistle. Sorry, guys, like that, which is kind of circling back my right here. They're doing such a good job at establishing part of this universe that they should be doing a better job with the rest of it. It surprises me that they've done 2 really effective time limit draws to get that notion over that can happen. And yet they've not thought once, maybe it would be really good on the website that you could track everybody's wins and losses and fans could fantasy book who from the current existing top 5 might be getting the title shot next. It doesn't help. I think, idiots like me that want to drag Cody Rhodes because of other guys I've seen use and abuse his position in the past, including his own dad, aided by the fact that maybe he shouldn't have got the shot. Or maybe he's backdoored into this position. I do wish that someone like a Darby Allin had been the recipient of the time limit draw rather than the Chris Jericho defeat. I wish they'd switched that around because already he took Cody to the limit. It would have been great if he took Jericho to the limit. And then you've got guys that are getting pushed through drawing matches, through winning. They have such potential to use these rules to the benefit. People assume that win-loss records are hamstringing for booking. It's not. You can actually have 2 baby faces on equal points and have one baby face say, well, that guy hit you with a chair last week, so I'm going to let you have your shot. But I want the first shot if you beat him. There are really easy ways. It's still predetermined. You can still write around the things that you've created in your league table. I just wish that there was that transparency because when it comes to things like time limit draws, they've done a fabulous job with it. When it comes to the way they've booked the tournament after the really messy pay-per-view start, they've had a bracket and they've followed it and they stuck to it and the finishes have been clean. The winners have won, the losers have lost. And I just wish that they weren't still quite shady. I don't know if this is because they haven't yet figured it out themselves or if it was just a big promise that they've not yet worked out how they're going to keep with so many other jobs to do.
Well, I'm sure this argument could roll on and will do, no doubt, as we go back into the office.
Every single Thursday.
So let us know your thoughts on what AEW is doing right and wrong with Dynamite in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Plus, you can let us know your thoughts on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE and watch there, follow all 3 of us. Follow Michael Hamflett at
Michael H. Amflett. The H stands for H. Murray.
You can follow Andy Murray at
Andy H. Murray. The H stands for Hendry, which is a wonderful visual gag for all the audio listeners.
Buy the magazine.
You can follow me at Adam Wilborn. Follow us all at WhatCultureWWE. This has been Get the Table. My thanks to Michael and Andy. Thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.